everybody. Welcome to the Hallmarkies podcast. And we're really excited today. Today, we have a bonus episode for you. We are talking about the AFI Passion Project that I've been working on for the patrons. We'll be finishing it up in the next couple of weeks. And we did when we started the project, we had our friend Zita on. And we did a halfway update when I halfway through. And so now that we're finished, we got Zita back. And thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, I'm so excited to be back on. It's been really fun to sort of follow you as you go through this journey, and I really admire your dedication and commitment. Sorry, I will be drinking a bit of water if my voice sounds hoarse. But no, it's really fun to sort of go through to read all of your responses. And I assume for you, this has been quite an interesting journey with a lot of unexpected twists and turns.
Yeah. Because when I started, there were over half that I had not seen.
Mm. Mm.
So quite a few that I had never seen. And so now I've officially watched all 100 at least once. Most of them I rewatched. There were a couple that I didn't. Uh, but for the most part, I did rewatch. And yeah, if you're listening, you're interested in reading my thoughts, exclusive reviews for the patrons, then you should definitely check out the Patreon every week, every Sunday, pretty much year round. I have a review, and we'll talk about at the end kind of what I have planned going forward after this project is done. And we have lots of other benefits to being a patron. And not only do you get to help the podcast, but we also have monthly watch alongs with talent, and we have early episodes, ad free, things like that. So just check it out. We would sure appreciate it. I try to make it as big a bang for your buck as possible. But yeah, so this was the final 50. It took me 2 years as a whole to do the project. So you can tell I really didn't miss very many weeks.
Mm.
if if there's 100 and it took me just over, it'll be just over 2 years. So
Yeah.
yeah, a couple of weeks that I missed here and there. But yeah, it's an interesting group. I mean, overall, I know we talked about it before, but overall, do you think it's a pretty solid list? Are you happy with the list, or not so much?
So I think maybe a general criticism of AFI that maybe you and I might have as people who are, I would say, quite passionate cinephiles,
Yeah,
people who, not to sound sort of arrogant and high-minded, but perhaps have seen more movies than the average person, is that the AFI lists seem quite narrow in terms of
yeah,
their scope. And I don't want to be rude, but sometimes you sort of get the sense that the people who voted on this, which it's very difficult to determine who was voting on these things. When you look into the sort of background, they promoted it as, oh, Hollywood's best and brightest were voting on these things.
hmm
But you look into it and there's no evidence that, oh yes, it was Meryl Streep and Steven Spielberg who voted on this. No, it could just be anybody really
Would it be
attempting
members
to
of the Film Institute? I don't know who those are.
yeah, it's very
Yeah,
difficult to determine. But I would just say, I'm sure you came across this a bit. You end up with, for example, A Streetcar Named Desire on the list.
right.
Great film,
Yeah,
fantastic film. I would never suggest that, it shouldn't be on a list of great movies. It is definitely something that you should see at least once in your life. I do not think that even its biggest fans would ever suggest that, oh, this is a heart-wrenching romantic drama.
right.
No, it is a film in which a violent, awful man who happens to be very charismatic and
Yeah,
manipulative, one, punches his pregnant wife, and two, rapes his mentally ill sister-in-law.
yeah.
Those are two things that you cannot possibly be construed
What a
as,
great romance.
yeah. And you definitely get the feeling that someone just went, well, I've heard that title before.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that might be kind of a fun category to start with is the ones of why is it on this list? That's why I have listed. So in this bottom 50, or top 50, it really should be. So the first one, even though I enjoy the film, I know you're not a big Cary Grant fan, but I like To Catch a Thief, but I would not put it on like the greatest passion movies ever made. It
Yes,
looks nice. It's got good fashion. It's slick. It's enjoyable, but I don't know.
I would tend to agree. I think the maybe the thriller elements of it are more
Hmm.
prominent. I guess you do have that famous fireworks kiss scene in there.
Hmm.
For me, the whole movie sort of gets upstaged by Grace Kelly's costumes, which are
Yeah,
amazing. I mean,
right.
he
And the
looks,
beauty
yeah.
of South of France.
But I think there's, no one has ever looked more beautiful on
Yeah,
screen than Grace Kelly
yeah,
does in this movie. It's
it's true.
absurd.
It's
Um,
true. I mean, I would probably pick Rebecca if I was going Hitchcock passion movies.
yes, I think Hitchcock is an interesting case. I mean, I know he made, I guess you could say some of his sort of pop thrillers,
Hmm.
some of his films that are less focused on being sort of dark and twisted do feature more traditional romantic pairings, but then
Hmm.
when I do think of him, I tend to think more of something like Vertigo,
Yeah.
where the central relationship is very sort of disturbing and again, dark,
Hmm.
not what you would think of as a traditional romance.
Well, speaking of Vertigo, I also have that on this category, this list. It's a great film. It's very well done, but I would not describe it as like it's, if anything, like the passion's kind of twisted and obsessive and I don't know. I would not put it on the most passionate movies ever made list.
Mm. Yes, I think you could make an argument for it, but then sort of if you're going to do that, most of the other choices on the list are quite milk toast. There's not a
Hmm.
whole lot in there that really pushes the boundaries in terms
Yeah.
of what we think of as a traditional romance. And so, I mean, obviously, this film was made long after the list was put together, but, would they include something like Phantom Thread in there? And I
Hmm.
doubt that they would. So, again, it's an odd choice.
Yeah. 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 Another one that is perfectly pleasant. I enjoy it, but not especially passionate is Swing Time. I feel like
Hmm.
if you're going to pick an Astaire Rogers, this isn't even the one that I would pick. Um, I would I and so yeah, I don't know. I would pick Top Hat or
Hmm.
um what are the other ones? Even Bachelor Mother. He's not in that one, but I like it better. That's for sure. This one it has some nice dancing, but the blackface is tough. Um, and
Yeah.
not my favorite.
I I was a bit confused, to be honest, about the fact that that's considered, along with Top Hat, to be the sort of consensus pick for the best Astaire Rogers film.
Hmm.
There are some marvelous dance sequences in it, but a lot of their films are very, very similar in a way where they're sort of
Yeah.
practically interchangeable. And I think does it need to be the one with the blackface sequence? I know that, you shouldn't just turn away from or sort of censor the ugly parts of film history, but it really does feel as though you could have just gone with the Barclays of Broadway or the gay divorcee without losing much.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. Then another one that I find very puzzling is The King and I. Has some
Hmm.
fun songs, some great costumes, performances are fun. But I mean, it's about she falls for a dictator who's gonna literally he's just gonna like they have to smuggle the people out, the people out that he's holding there against their will. Like, I mean, this is the whole plot of the what's her name? I I don't know. It's not especially passionate in my opinion.
Yes, I feel that way too. And I also, it's just a very strange film all around. It's very much of its time. And I think it's because of the sort of racial element that the relationship between the two, as far as it is portrayed, is very chaste, I would say.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
I do think that part of it is that his character is meant to be Asian, and there's a lot of sort of anxiety about depicting white
Mm,
women being intimate with men who are not white. And, that turns me off a bit. And also, just generally, the 40s film that sort of tried to tell the story, Anna and the King of Siam, is still very much a part of its time,
I've never seen that one.
Um,
Is that better, would you say, or
so, okay, it still has a lot of issues with racism, and again, is still a product of its period. But I would just say, in general terms, is just more interesting,
mm,
is how I would put it. I think it's a movie that does try to sort of wrestle with the problematic elements of the story. So the fact that he is a ruthless, brutal dictator is wrestled with sort of
mm,
head on in that one,
yeah.
but also the fact that she is very much from the perspective of this woman, and it's based on a real life figure. And it was later determined that she had essentially made everything up. But
Oh
it's
yeah, that's
very much a
interesting.
narrative of, I, this civilized white
Colonialism.
person,
Yeah.
came into the household of this savage, and I managed to tame them and introduce, good Western morals. And the 40s film, it's still a 40s film, so it's not going to be in favor of decolonization or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it does wrestle with her hypocrisy. For example, there's a big scene where she gets very upset at him forcing his subjects to prostrate themselves before him. And she says, no, you shouldn't do that. It's very dehumanizing. And then he makes the point that she, as a subject of the British Crown, is willing to curtsy in front of people who are of a higher social station
Mm-hmm.
than she is, and says, well, this is just a different physical act. How are these things really substantively different? And so there is some fascinating stuff in there for as much as it's still, tough to watch today. Whereas The King and I, it's like a lot of 50s films, oddly, it tries to sort of skate over the surface of all that sort of
Yeah.
ugly, troubling stuff and ends up being worse. And I think it would be very tough, especially today, to actually make a version of The King and I that does get into the sort of nitty-gritty. But I do think there could actually be a very interesting film about sort of race and class, if you wanted to transform this story into that.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you got was it in like it's not Thailand, but uh it's like in Malaysia, like it's down that part of the world, right?
Yeah, is it
Yeah.
Mongolia?
Mongolia,
Sorry,
okay.
it's been a
If you
while.
had somebody from that part of the world telling the story, then I might be kind of intrigued, to see from their point of view.
Yes,
That might be interesting. But yeah, I mean, did you know that Yul Brynner performed the role over 4,000 times
I
on
know
Broadway?
this was a
Lord,
role that sort of
that's amazing.
yeah,
That's a
he played
lot.
throughout his life. And
Unbelievable. So, but yeah, that was not. I was like, what? Why is this on this list? Ho ho ho! We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies Patreon.
Do you love Hallmarkies podcasts, especially at Christmas?
Do you enjoy the holiday previews, recaps, interviews, and bonus episodes?
If the answer is yes, please consider supporting the Hallmarkies Patreon. We need your help to do what we do both during the Christmas season and all year round.
But not only do you help a podcast led by strong, independent women by becoming a Patreon, you get to become a part of the Hallmarkies family.
Starting at only $2 a month as a patron, you will have access to our Facebook Patreon group where we talk about the movies, shows, and more all year.
We also have many monthly patron watch alongs with guests like Lacey Chabert, Natalie Hall, Paul Campbell, Mary Lou Henner, and more, giving their behind the scenes details of their films.
As a patron, you also have the chance to provide input into the podcast and even join us at different tiers.
So this Christmas season, spread some cheer to the Hallmarkies Patreon and become a member today. You won't regret it.
Go to patreon.com/hallmarkies to learn more.
That's patreon.com/Hallmarkies. Another musical that I enjoy. I like musicals. Actually, I have two musicals that I don't think are particularly great romances. But especially My Fair Lady. I think that everything that doesn't work in My Fair Lady is the romance, and I try to like put that aside and pretend it has a different ending. And I like the movie way better with a more like interesting ending, because I don't know, I just don't really like the idea of her ending up with the professor. I mean, it's got great, obviously classic songs, incredible costumes, and I love the film, but I don't think it particularly works as like a swoon-worthy romance.
yes, and I would say more generally, this is something that sort of concerns me in an indirect way with poor Audrey Hepburn, who obviously has this rock solid star persona,
Mm-hmm.
is very popular, but is weirdly desexualized in a lot of her films. And
Mm,
I know you could say that just broadly, in terms of actresses from 50s films, but then on the other hand, even something like Grace Kelly, who usually played the very sort of icy, cosseted, posh girl,
yeah,
did get to have more passionate romances than Audrey
true.
Hepburn. I
Yeah,
think,
maybe that is like Two for the Road is kind of
yeah,
probably
I
the
would say
only one of the
later
only
on in her
ones.
career,
Yeah,
they let her loosen up a bit, maybe,
yeah,
but
that's
especially
true.
with her 50s films when she was sort of first breaking through, they give her much older romantic interests to work with. And I would say that in My Fair
That's
Lady,
true.
the age gap and just the fact that there is no palpable connection between Rex Harrison and Hepburn is almost painful to watch. The fact that you're meant to
Yeah,
believe that she is in love with him. And, I want to preface this by saying, obviously, plenty of age gap relationships do work out, and people fall in love in spite of all of that. And,
right.
I'm not suggesting that it's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say, particularly in Hepburn's case,
Yeah.
in something like Funny Face with a
Yeah,
stare.
I was just reviewed Funny Face on my
Yeah.
channel, and so I was just talking about that. Yeah, that she does have a, because there's also Gary Cooper,
Mm.
and their big age gap there. There's yeah, a whole bunch of her movies. She does have the big age gap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they always feel more to me like
Sabrina.
a young girl hanging out with her father's friend, and there's sort of
Mm-hmm.
nothing super romantic There, I
Yeah.
don't know. It's always very odd to me when she has to kiss or embrace someone at the end of one of these films.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Another one that I like, but I don't think is particular. I mean, it does have a romance, but it's just more about the dancing, is An American in Paris.
Hmm.
I would not describe that as like a super passionate film. And yeah, I mean it's fun. I like the dancing, but
Hmm.
it's not like so that would be on my why is it on this list. And then the last one is On Golden Pond. It was a decent family drama. I liked it, like good performances, but I don't know. I would not say that that was one of the most passionate movies ever made.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I would not say that the Catherine Hepburn Henry Fonda relationship was really the focal point
Yeah,
of the
it's
film. I
more about the
guess
father and daughter, really.
I guess you do want to credit them for um, I guess, depicting a marriage in
Yeah.
a romantic light, especially a long-term marriage. I think the most traditional sort of tropes in the romance genre tend to relate
It's true.
almost exclusively to, couples that haven't gotten together yet. So it is, I guess, nice to see a long-time married
Mhm.
couple in a romantic context, but it's not a great romance by any means. And then An American in Paris, I feel as though for me, the romance honestly takes away from that film. Uh, I feel bad for
Yeah.
Leslie
Another
Caron.
age gap, big age gap.
Yeah, who plays the lead actress. I believe it was her first film role. She was essentially plucked off the stage because she was a very good ballerina to play the lead in this film. And I just think, God, can you imagine being a first timer and you have to go up against Gene Kelly in the prime of his career? And I would say that, sometimes it works when you just bring in this new, fresh face without much acting training. And sometimes it goes disastrously wrong. And I would say that it did here. She seems very untrained, very unsure of herself on screen. And to me, it really does detract from the effect of the film. Also, something very odd about the movie script is that our male lead, played by Gene Kelly, is introduced as a struggling artist who has this one benefactor, a very wealthy woman who is seen to, be a bit older than him. She sort of has the upper hand in their relationship. And it's very strange that there isn't even a scene that we get in which, oh, he breaks up with her, or he tells her that, oh no, I love this
Mm,
other woman more. She
it's
just
true.
disappears from the film, never to be seen again, which is a very just messy way of
Yeah, that's
writing,
true.
I would say.
Yeah. We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's Susan Mallory's new book, For the Love of Summer. Ready for a story that hits you right in the feels and makes you believe in the power of friendship and resilience? Check out New York Times bestselling author Susan Mallory's For the Love of Summer. Experience Allison's roller coaster ride of life, grappling with financial troubles and emotional highs and lows, and finding unexpected allies. Unravel the intricacies of family ties, the solace of true friendship, and the unwavering spirit that propels us forward. Grab your copy of For the Love of Summer at your favorite bookstore or use the affiliate link below and discover a story that will leave you asking, what would you do? That's For the Love of Summer, available today wherever you purchase your books. Well, let's talk about some that I didn't love in this, like flat out, just enjoy. Um, First one, it's one of the top 10. I did not love Love Story. Uh,
Yes.
I guess I can understand why. I mean, it was so iconic. It was such a hit. But I first of all, I thought it was so bizarre that she like didn't even look sick at all. It's not like one of these Nicholas Sparks movies where they start to get all like sad and because looking, white and pale, and I don't even know what it was. I guess it was cancer. I don't even. And he has to tell her that she has this illness, and so yeah, I guess they had okay chemistry, but it did not work in pushing my emotional buttons. And the whole idea of being in love means you don't have to say you're sorry is absurd. Uh, yeah, so that one wasn't my favorite.
Yes, I'm very much on board with that. And I think a struggle that I have with the sort of romance trope where this person is dying of some mysterious illness
Right.
and it's meant to make everything sort of more romantic because, oh, now there's this sense of urgency because they are, literally not going to be alive anymore soon. And just as a trope, I'm going to be honest, it's never really worked for me, in part just because it seems so serious for something that's just sort of a narrative arc. I guess
Yeah.
I've always just sort of struggled in especially kind of light, fluffy romances like this to sort of turn my brain off, where I think, no, this is actually really horrible, and she should be going in to get these, really painful, invasive
Yeah.
surgeries.
I mean, she's on
That
her
make-
deathbed and she looks exactly the same.
Yeah,
Like, I'm
yeah.
like, what? You don't even look like, at least in like the Nicholas Sparks movies,
Mm,
like Walk to Remember or something like that. Like she looks like really sick when
yeah.
she's, I
And
mean,
also,
yeah,
in terms of that sort of tragic doomed romance genre, which I do love in general
yeah,
terms, and I think can be enormously moving in the right context. To me, the thing that makes it moving is usually when there's some element of choice involved, when the characters do have um, a degree of control over their lives and the decisions that they make, and they sort of voluntarily choose to end their relationships.
yeah.
I haven't read Poetics, the sort of classic um, ancient Greek meditation on what makes a great drama. But I know that they make the point that in order to sort of make a real tragedy, the characters have to be self-destructive. They need to have this sort of fatal flaw
Oh,
that
yeah.
ends
Fatal
their life.
Flaw.
Yeah, but they need to have a certain amount of agency. And we, as the audience, need to understand that this isn't just something that's being inflicted upon them by outside sources. And I think
Hmm.
with an illness, obviously, oh my God, you would never wish that on anyone. And they're suffering needlessly. But it's also, it just removes the sort of dramatic anchor of the
Hmm.
story if this
Yeah,
woman is just helpless and she's dying. I don't know, it's just never romantic to me.
yeah, yeah. Well, the next one that I want to talk about is also in the top 10, and it is a big hit, considered a classic by many. It's Dr. Zhivago. I started it to try to watch it again because I actually saw it in a movie theater. They did a classic screening a couple of years ago. I went and saw it, and I don't know. I think it's the most boring movie I've ever seen in my life. I just did not care about any of these people. And yeah, it looks pretty. There's some nice cinematography. David Lee knows how to, make a pretty movie, but it's so long, and I just did not care about the drama of these people, and just this guy that they were all fighting over was not compelling to me. I know it's a classic novel, it's just not for me.
Yes, it's a very frustrating film to me. I
Yeah.
think you get the general sense that they haven't captured any of what makes the book special. And I think it is a problem that, as far as I can tell, the sort of qualities of the novel that make it great are kind of unique to the literary form. Even with the length of the film, it really does just feel as though we're getting a kind of Wikipedia plot description form of storytelling. They
Yeah.
hit all of the beats, but nothing here resonates emotionally. And you also get, just sort of on a deeper level, a sense that this is meant to be an inherently political work. They're
Mm,
meant to be
yeah.
saying something about sort of decline and disillusionment uh, in a sort of post-Russian Revolution world, and you get very little of that here. Something like Tom Courtenay's character, Pasha, who's meant to go through this very extreme transformation where he's this very young, idealistic revolutionary at the beginning of the film, and he becomes essentially an authoritarian by the halfway point. That should land really hard and be devastating and have some effect. And it just sort of doesn't, because he has to be this sidelined figure here. And yes, the central romance does not work for me.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a very frustrating film. I think, you know, some critics I feel are too quick to have a sort of knee-jerk negative response to your usual sort of classic lit adaptation, and I
Hmm.
tend to be more forgiving of them than others. But I do think this film makes a good case that, cinema and literature are two different artistic formats,
Yeah.
and simply taking a great novel and throwing it up on screen in such a sort of artless way does not result in great art.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I mean, and it is beautiful, but I have to care about the characters, and I just didn't. I just didn't care
Mm.
about the characters. The next one is kind of interesting because I accidentally watched the remake of The Postman Always Rings Twice first, and
Ah.
then by accident, and then watched the original from 1946. And so I guess in comparison to the remake, which I really didn't like, I liked this better. Like it's a decent pot boiler, I guess. You know, like it creates tension like pretty well, but I still didn't really like the story, and uh but I really disliked that remake. I felt like it was oddly predatory. The way that the love scenes were shot was very like everything felt kind of like he was like I didn't feel her agency in the love scenes, which was weird. I thought like this was supposed to be romantic, and he was like so aggressive that it wasn't sexy to me. It was weird. I just did not like the way that it was filmed. I didn't like the way it was done. It wasn't for me. And so I don't know if it's just kind of my bad feeling about the remake that maybe is why I still didn't really love this original. It's a very slow burn. Not a lot happens in this movie. But yeah, I don't know. It was just kind of a weird experience, I guess, that I had.
Hmm. Yes, I think I'm in a similar place, and I do not love The Postman Always Rings Twice as a sort of media property.
Mm,
Having said that, the 1946 film in particular, which I think is more successful than the
yes.
remake, I can understand what people find interesting about it. And I think, like a lot of noirs, um, there's sort of a struggle to determine, well, is this really a love story? Because the relationships in these stories are always transactional. They're always sort of about how passion fades fast and people come to sort of hate and resent one another. I would argue that as an on-screen translation of the short story that it's based on, it still doesn't entirely work for me. But there are kind of memorably dark moments in the telling of the story. The fact that these are people who literally kill someone together, ostensibly so that they can be together properly, without anyone judging them. And then all of that romantic passion just sort of disappears. and evaporates during a very short period. That is interesting to watch. I, again, I do not think they fully stick the landing in capturing all of the psychological nuance and complexity there. Nevertheless, I feel as though it's very rare to see that depicted on screen, especially because in conventional dramatic terms, watching two people who are, attracted to one another, are potentially going to have an affair, and there's tension there, tends to be more inherently dramatically compelling than these people literally went ahead and did the thing that they've been threatening to do. Let's watch them in the aftermath of doing that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the next one is one that I did struggle with because I didn't realize that there was an X-rated film on this list, which I usually don't watch. X-rated films, I think I'm pretty open-minded, but I don't know. I just usually don't watch those. Um, and so it was The Last Tango in Paris, and I was just surprised that this is even considered an American film. Uh, I I wouldn't have even, but it was terrible. I hated it. It was just like a horrible romance, and yeah, I guess it is sexy, like I guess, but I don't know. Didn't like that at all.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting case. I would count it as an American film because it was made during that very brief period in which sort of American studios were willing to invest in European art films. And so I do think it's an interesting snapshot of that period in time. I do find the efforts to present this as, a great classic film. Sometimes I'd sort of roll my eyes. I don't think it's all that terribly special at some
Yeah,
points, and even as far as sort of what would you call it? Transgressive, highly sexual films, which I know you're not necessarily a fan of,
right.
but there were a lot of those made during the 70s, and I think comparing this to something like In the Realm of the Senses,
Mm,
it's just not as provocative as that in a way. A lot of the provocation here is of a very sort of base level. It's sort of your usual rape fantasy, I feel, for
yeah,
a
you
lot
don't
of
really care about the people, and I think that's when like a movie becomes really like titillating, is when like you really are feeling the chemistry. There's like the opposite of chemistry in this.
Yes, it does feel to me, and I know that people sort of make a defense of it as, oh, it's sort of this film working in this moral gray area. And if you sort of take issue with the infamous butter scene, you're just being a moralist and you
Hmm.
can't appreciate the sort of shades of gray in between the black and white. And you're suggesting that depiction equals endorsement. And
Right.
there are plenty of films that are, let's say problematic, that contain content that, I can't outright endorse, that I still take a lot away from, that I
Yeah.
still find fascinating. To me, the rape scene in this one is there to titillate. And quite frankly, on top of me finding it distasteful and troubling that there are people in the audience who sort of get off on this, I also just find it very juvenile.
Yeah.
The fact that this was sort of taken seriously as, the most important film that's ever been made about a sexual relationship is just the usual, you and I are women, you come across this all the time as a woman, stories where, particularly male artists seem to get off on this idea that, oh, what women really want is to be sexually abused. And I think that is not the
No.
case. And it's
Yes.
also just God, are you know, 15 years old, you know nothing about life. It's just, it's irritating on the
Yeah.
top of defensive.
Well, I'll just list off a couple others that I did care for, and then we can start talking about ones I like. I didn't like Splendor in the Grass. I didn't like Gigi, which could also be in the why is this on this list? I wasn't a big fan of Dark Victory. I didn't love that
Mm.
one. Out of Africa was totally meh, in my opinion. It was fine. And Anna Karenina, I also thought was totally, I would way rather watch the Joe Wright version. Way
Mm.
better, in my opinion.
Yes, I have to say that I feel a bit bad for Greta Garbo because even though she was one of the most popular stars of her time, she is sort of infamous for being dealt a bad hand in terms of her artistic collaborators. You know,
Mm,
she was stuck making very middle-brow films that I would say in a lot of cases feel more of their time, more rooted in their time period in terms of their sort of pretensions than, say, the films being made by Joan Crawford during that
mm,
period, which feel a lot more alive in this day and age, I would say. But yeah, some of the ones that you listed, I would tend to agree. Something like Gigi, I can sort of mount a defense of it, a guilty defense. I still think it's a very beautiful film
yeah.
in certain ways. But yes, the romance at its center is pretty blood-curdling if you start to think about it. And yeah, some of the other ones that you listed, I can see why you might not like them.
Yeah. We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies merch store.
Are you looking for that perfect gift for the postable, hardy, or Hallmarky in your life?
What about getting that t-shirt or hoodie that will help you stand out at your next holiday party?
Now is the time to check out the Hallmarkies merch store.
Full of festive designs by artists like Jessica Miller, Carrie from Hallmark Comics, and more.
You can even have more than just shirts, but totes, cell phone cases, notebooks, mugs, and more.
And it isn't just Hallmark. We have designs for Anna Green Gables, Man from Snowy River, The Nanny, and more.
Every purchase at the merch store goes to help support the podcast and allows us to make the great content you know and love.
There are frequent sales, so go to tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies or see the link in the description.
That's tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies.
Let's talk about some of my favorites. We got to start with one of my favorite movies of all time. You got to start with Beauty and the Beast. Beautiful love story, one of the finest animated films I think ever made. The beautiful animation, the beautiful songs, so memorable, and that that the message, of course, at the core is the beauty is found within, and just loved it. And I love the fact that they have two animated films on this list. I think that that's a little uncommon. A lot of times, animated films are kind of pushed to the side on lists like this, so that makes me happy that that it was acknowledged.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's an interesting case. I do wonder, even now, when there are sort of even more prominent animated films, would we see more on the list? I
Mm-hmm.
have to admit that as a cinephile, I haven't really explored the animated realm enough. I would say I haven't seen enough films in that sort of genre.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting to see that they were, I guess, progressive
Yeah.
enough to include these on the list.
Mm-hmm. Another favorite, if we're going for rom-coms, is The Shop Around the Corner. I love the whole perfumery story. I think that it's almost impossible to do wrong. It just works. The idea of two people that don't like each other in real life are falling in love with each other over their words. I think that that is just like an inherently really romantic and likable idea. And so, Shop Around the Corner, I think it works so well. I love You've Got Mail as well. I love She Loves Me on Broadway. The pro shot of that is so good. And it's just a story that I love.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think that uh, James Stewart and Margaret
Hmm.
Sullivan have fantastic
Hmm.
chemistry.
Yeah. Yeah, really, really good. I again in rom-com, but I think it's really effective. I think Pretty Women, I think is really effective. I think partly
Oh,
because of the chemistry is just off the charts. And it's basically like a Cinderella story, but I think it's really pleasing.
uh, I have to admit, we have a difference of opinion on
Ah,
this.
okay.
And I find it really, again, just shallow. I think that there is room to make a really effective romantic drama about a prostitute who ends up in a sort of real relationship with her client. I would
Hmm.
argue that this film is morally reprehensible in
Ooh,
many regards.
yeah.
Even comparing it to, there were plenty of films that I bring her up again, but Joan Crawford made
Hmm.
during the 30s, where even though it was during the period in which the production code was in effect, and they couldn't sort of directly acknowledge her status as a kept woman or a call girl, you
Breakfast at
definitely
Tiffany's even.
yeah, but you
Yeah.
definitely sense that that's what she is. And
Hmm.
those are, even though they're made during the 30s, which we think of as a more sort of um, moralistic time in which people were unwilling to ask sort of hard questions
Hmm.
about the position of women in society, she is allowed to be a very sort of tough-minded woman in those films who is willing to weaponize her sexuality.
Hmm.
And they're also uh, very much about the precarious economic position of women during the
Yeah.
Great Depression and really do say something about the question of whether it's even possible for a woman to find real love, proper love, in a society where she's being oppressed by men and she essentially has to sell herself if she wants to
Yeah.
get married. And those are incredibly sort of cynical, almost difficult to watch films because they're so black-hearted and dark. But I still find them incredibly moving, and they give Crawford, as an actress, so much to work with. She gets to be deeply emotional and sort
Yeah.
of fiery in those films and her characters are flawed in ways that are sort
Hmm.
of deeply relatable for women. Sorry, getting back to Pretty Women, what I find so kind of ugly about it
Hmm.
is that, we get this final scene where he walks up the fire
Hmm.
escape and he sort of saves her like the knight in shining armor, and she says, "Oh, she saved him right back," talking about a man on a white horse.
She kind of saves him from the
Yeah.
curse of being a bad man of business.
It
And
just
yeah.
doesn't, she does almost nothing from what we can see in the film. She is cute. That is
Convinces
how
him to
she
not
plays.
sell the company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I would say, in a Joan Crawford film, say what you like about the woman, but I think there's something to the fact that a lot of her films, to me, felt as though they were directly targeted at women. And she sort of did
Hmm.
things in those films that I feel would make men uncomfortable or wouldn't be, I guess, directed at the male gaze in the
Yeah.
same way. And this movie, we are meant to believe that Julia Roberts is a hard up prostitute who has to work on the, seedy streets of Los Angeles. And her best friend is a drug addict who
Yeah.
is suffering and struggling, essentially with mental health problems.
Yeah.
And we are meant
Still
to
on the
think,
rent.
we're meant to think, oh no, she flosses every night. She's a good girl. And to
Yeah.
me, another thing that sort of gave me, I guess, the ick in
Uh-huh.
internet parlance was just the fact that they use the best friend character to absolve Julia Roberts of her presumed sins. And to
Hmm.
me, that makes it clear that they think that
Hmm.
the target audience for this film are incapable of viewing prostitutes as human beings. They
Hmm.
automatically think that sex workers are a lower class of people who are not
Have to
deserving of
be
sex.
elevated.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
Julia Roberts, they have to prove that, oh, well, she might appear to be working in the sex trade, but actually she's saintly. And we can prove that because look at her best friend. She's a mess in comparison. She's
Mm.
taking drugs. She's not um, good with her finances. And I just find it so. And
I think it's all
yeah.
fair points. There's nothing like gritty or realistic about this. But I do think I'd find some value in the idea of sort of a modern fairy tale and the sort of modern take on Cinderella. Like we obviously don't have royalty in America. And so I think this is like a fairly like decent sort of, in my opinion, at least like a decent sort of way to kind of flip that story and make it like appropriate for 1991 1990. And they just have off the charts chemistry, the two of these actors, absolutely great. And so just as like a modern take of Cinderella, I think it's pretty charming. But I agree, there's has really nothing to say about the grittier topics, so that's completely fair. Moving on. So another one that I mean, I wouldn't say absolutely love Pretty Women, but I think it's cute. Another one that I absolutely love is Moonstruck. I absolutely love Moonstruck. I love the script. I love the characters. I love her character, Cher's character, Loretta. But then I also love Olympia's, her mom's character, and that whole sort of arc that she goes on, meeting the professor. And when she says at the end that your life is not nothing, and that whole scene at the end with the oatmeal, I love. And um, it's a favorite for me.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one on there. It's not maybe the first one that jumps out for a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
and it's an interesting case.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, the whole depiction of the sort of older man, younger woman, sorry, not older man, uh, younger man, older woman dynamic also really
Yeah.
works
Yeah,
for me
it's true.
here.
I didn't
I,
even realize that the first couple times I saw it that there was like a big age gap between them. And yeah, it's like you're a wolf. You're a wolf with that.
Yeah. But
And
I
so
would say again, amazing chemistry between the
yeah.
two of them, and they're both very beautiful in this film. And I have to say that uh, hmm, not all romantic dramas sort of have to be believable for me, of course. Obviously, people would point out that there's fantastical elements in a lot of them, and they are
Hmm.
quite removed from reality. But I did believe this sort
Yeah.
of dynamic, and I do think that it gives you the sort of classic pleasure of seeing a character who's quite cynical, who does not expect to sort of fall in love again later in life, slowly being worn down. And I think when she sort of does commit to their relationship at the end and to being with him, it's so sort of powerful because it is unexpected and it feels hard won. You have this sense that this is something that she's really had to ponder before really
Yeah.
sort of going all in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the top five I think is pretty solid. I mean, I don't like Gone with the Wind has so many dated aspects. It's hard, but it is pretty passionate, and it's such like a big epic movie that I do I do admire it, and just the spectacle of it I admire. And I can see why it's so high. The only I mean I think West Side Story is an excellent film, but I would never put it on this list because I think that they have like they don't have good chemistry. I don't think at all. And so I mean, if anything, in my opinion, I think this recent remake, is actually better. I think that they have better chemistry, and I think the singing is better in the new one. And but that's just me. But so I would not have West Side Story on this list, and I would not have it so high. That's for sure. But but for the most part, Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, West Side Story, Roman Holiday, and Affair to Remember. I think those are all pretty good movies. What do you think?
Yeah, again, this is one where we differ.
Oh,
Unfortunately, I, mm, am not really a fan of 4 out of 5 of these films, and
oh, four to five.
yeah, the one that I really like is the deeply problematic Gone with the Wind, and I think this
Mm-hmm.
can only really be
You don't like
explained by the
Casablanca?
fact that
Oh my gosh.
no, I don't.
Whoa, hot take.
But I just have a sort of a fondness for this story because the book was one of the first books that I read, and I
Yeah,
read it, that 9, 10 times as a young girl. It's something that really sort of drilled into my memory, and it was one of the first romances that I came in contact with. And honestly, to make a case for it, in spite of all of the undeniable awfulness of it, uh, this is an extraordinarily complex film for something that
yeah,
was the biggest Hollywood blockbuster of all time at one
yeah,
point. The fact that our protagonist here is so aggressively unsympathetic
yeah,
and deeply unlikable. And, it's not just the fact that she is a slaveholder, she is a literal historical monster. But even just
yeah.
considering, you know, the
I mean, she
white
steals her
people,
sister's husband and doesn't even
yeah,
care.
yeah, the white people in the audience who would have gone to see this, who were presumably racist as well and didn't care about the whole slaveholder thing. Just the fact that, yeah, she's a husband stealer. She is having extramarital affairs left and right.
Mhm.
She sort of flouts conventions and becomes the sort of brutal overseer of this ranch. The fact that she seems sort of incapable of feeling sympathy for these struggling, suffering soldiers at this hospital. She is sort of near sociopathic during certain scenes in this film. And I have to admit that their whole dynamic, which is, I guess you could say, your typical thing in a romantic drama where, oh, she pretends that she dislikes him, but secretly, this is the only man who she's really attracted to, especially on a physical level. And yet it does work for me. Their sort of back and forth, their big dramatic kiss before he goes away to fight. And especially just the fact that part of the whole point of the story is that Scarlett, as a character, only really wants what she can't have. And so at the end of the film, when she finally decides, okay, I'm committing to you. I want to be with you. And then he turns her down again.
Yeah.
I do think just the suggestion that for her, he's almost that's his way of continuing their romance in a sense, because she would lose all interest if he indicated that he was going to
Mm,
back down and fully submit to her.
mm.
So it's to me, it's a very troubling film, and yet it is fascinating and problematic to me. And I can think about it, I can pick it apart, I can sort of dissect it for eternity in a way that I feel I can't with some of these other films.
Mm. Yeah, those are some really interesting points about it. I mean, it's one that I remember watching with my grandma, and she was a collector of Scarlett O'Hara dolls. And just she really, I think it was her favorite movie, and I adored my grandma, and so I think there's some nostalgia as well, in that regard. And there's just so many aspects of it that are impressive. The incredible score, the incredible shots that they got. I mean, you just think of the scope and the the of course the scene with the when they pull out and all the soldiers and it's just so massive how many people that they got for that. And I know, and so it's obviously has problematic offensive things, but I still do admire it in a lot of ways. But I'm just curious, so if you had to pick a number one, if they have Casablanca number one, if you had to pick out of all of these 100, what would you pick as your number one?
Yes, so this is very complicated. I really had to think this one through,
Yeah,
just because there are so many great options. You
sure.
get very conflicted, I think, inevitably. But for me, it was sort of a showdown between some of the older films, and I eventually landed on It Happened One Night,
Ah,
which is, a less troubling Clark Gable film, but one of my favorite movies. I think it is a perfect film, the sort of ideal romantic comedy. I do not think that anyone has ever really topped it in terms of replicating this sort of signature rom-com dynamic. I think the fact that it blends so beautifully with the sort of adventure genre, it just gives me such a warm feeling every
yeah,
time I watch it. I walk away from it thinking, I want to fall in love.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't think there are many films that sort of inspire you that way.
It's so well crafted. It would definitely be in my top three for sure. So I totally agree with you there. And just as far as my personal favorite with nostalgia included, I mean, Beauty and the Beast would probably be my number one because
Mm.
I love Disney and animation, and I think it's a fine film. But and I know a lot of people like poo-poo this movie, they don't like it, but whatever. For me, it would probably be The Sound of Music. I watched it on like repeat as a child.
Yeah.
um, and I do think they have incredible chemistry. I love the songs. I think it is one of the finest stage to screen adaptations. It's one of the only ones that actually improves upon the stage musical like quite a bit. And I just love it. So that would probably be my favorite, but it would definitely be one of those three. It Happened One Night, Beauty and the Beast, or The Sound of Music.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you there. I think it's a film where, to me, the songs are the real focal point, and I just think the fact that you have so many classic
Yeah,
tunes in one film seems miraculous in a way. The fact that they're all so memorable in their way, and also just the fact that for such a long film, I'm sure you'll agree with me, a lot of these sort of 50s and 60s blockbuster extravaganzas, looking back, seem a bit longer, a bit more bloated than
yeah,
they really need to be. To me, The Sound of
true.
Music, even though it's very, very long,
Yeah,
uh, the time always passes by
yeah,
quickly. I just think it's so entertaining. It's so well edited that I
yeah,
am always drawn in. I'm always captured by it. Even the one part of the film that I would say doesn't entirely work for me, which is the whole just generally the fact that it is about ostensibly resisting Nazism. I guess I just never buy over the
hmm,
course of the film that I'm watching, an extremely important film about the moral courage of Austrians who resisted and or
right,
escaped from that area of the world once the Nazis came into power. And so the sort of last small bit where it's just all about them leaving and going off into the mountains doesn't necessarily captivate me. It's not what I remember when I think of the film.
right.
But
Yeah, I
more
agree.
broadly, the romance, somewhat improbably, I feel, works, because it
Yeah.
definitely feels as though there's a chance that it could have been a My Fair Lady situation
Hmm.
where it's just sort of there, it's functional, but you don't think, wow, these two really have chemistry. I sort of believe that these people are in love. And I think all credit to Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews. They really sell you on it, even though the dynamic is a bit uh, unusual, shall we say. I just think the fact that he is so cold at first, but you really do believe it. And even with all the
Yeah.
complicating factors, the scene where they sort of dance together in the moonlight
Mm.
is very moving.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, what we thought would be fun now that we finished this project is I was trying to think of what I could do next that would provide some kind of guide for these reviews, and that would be fun. This, of course, was I think the list came out in 2000 or 2001. And so there's a lot of movies since then
Mm.
that are not on the list, obviously, and a lot that they neglected to put on the list from the previous. So what I've asked you to do is to come up with a new AFI 100 bonus list.
Mm.
That will be my next project, and you've been kind enough to take on that, and I'm really excited. So going forward, it'll be AFI Passions bonus project, the Zita project, Passions project, and I'm really excited. It's going to be fun.
Oh, great. I'm really glad to hear that. And you very kindly allowed me to put some sort of international cinema
Mm-hmm.
on the list, which I think does open things up a bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, the canon of American romantic films is already massive. You could spend a lifetime trying to, I guess, just get a sense of what the American romantic drama is all about. But, having French films on there, Japanese films,
Mm-hmm.
German movies,
Yeah.
it does open you up to a lot more.
Mm-hmm. And some comedies too.
Mm.
Yeah, so it won't all be dramas. So it's gonna be fun. I'm excited, and hopefully it'll, like this was nice because I was able to check a lot of classics, off the list, and I think that with your list, I'll probably be able to check off quite a few more like indie art house, kind of films, and so the patrons will get to enjoy that along with me, and so I'll probably take a couple of weeks off in between, and then we'll be right at it, and it'll be fun.
Yeah, it
So
should be fun. And I'll be very interested to see what you think of some of these films, because I know you told me that you haven't seen some of them before,
yeah.
so I'll be intrigued. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'll put a link down to the list if people want to check it out for as far as this AFI Passions list, and let us know what you think, all the different films we talked about. We talked about quite a few in this episode. And if you are interested in more of my thoughts, join the Patreon, and all of the essays, all of the pieces that I wrote are all there for the
Mm.
patrons to read. So if you're curious, for more of my thoughts on some of the ones we maybe briefly mentioned, you can read my whole post about every single one of these 100 movies. So please check out the Patreon. I would really, 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 really appreciate it. And I think you find it well worth your investment. But thank you so much for doing this. This is always so much fun. And I really appreciate it. And if people want to follow you on like socials, your like podcast or anything that you do, where can they do that?
Yes. So I'm on Twitter at Zita_short, and I'm working on the Women in Session podcast at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the In Session Film website, and you can just generally find it on most podcast hosting platforms. And so we focus on a very diverse range of sort of film-centric topics, but generally from a sort of female perspective.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Well, you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all of our social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out. Also, make sure that you're following the podcast, Hallmarkies Pod and Hallmarkies Podcast, all of our social media. And if you are listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. We really appreciate that. And if you're listening on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel. We appreciate that so much. And we have the Patreon, as we've discussed. Please take a look at that. and the merch store. So check that out. And thanks so much again. And we'll talk to y'all later. Bye.